There is a fruit native to this continent that weighs more than a mango. It grows wild across 26 states. It fed entire civilizations before the first European ship arrived, and you cannot buy it in a single grocery store in America. Not because it doesn't grow, not because it doesn't taste good, but because it breaks a rule most people never question. If something is abundant, someone must own it. This fruit doesn't ship well, doesn't store for months under fluorescent lights, doesn't respond to pesticides or monoculture schedules. It ripens when it wants to, falls when it's ready, and it rots within days. In a system built on control, this fruit is chaos. In a world built on survival, it is medicine. 3 times the nutrition of an apple, more protein than a banana, a complete amino acid profile most seeds can't match. And it grows where you are not supposed to need it, along riverbanks, in floodplains, in the shadowed understory of forests that were here before roads. We built an entire food system around fruits that travel well and survive storage. We forgot the ones that kept us alive. This is not ancient history. This is a living system. Still growing. Still waiting. Stay with me. What you're about to hear could change how you see survival. The question is not whether this fruit still exists. The question is why we were taught to forget it. When the shelves empty, memory is the only supply chain that doesn't break. You can stockpile rice, you can store wheat, you can rotate cans in a basement and call it preparedness, but no warehouse holds what the forest gives for free. And no logistics network moves faster than root systems that were planted a century ago. This matters because systems fail, not someday, not in theory, regularly. We have seen it in fuel shortages, in supply disruptions that left entire regions without fresh food for weeks, in inflation that turned staples into luxuries, in hurricanes that shut down interstates and left trucks idling 3 states away. The average American city holds 72 hours of food. 3 days. After that, it's not about money, it's about access. And access is only real if it doesn't depend on someone else's infrastructure. Most people prepare by hoarding what the system sells. They buy more of what they were already dependent on. Canned goods from centralized factories, freeze-dried meals shipped from distribution hubs, carbohydrates that need stable electricity and stable economies to exist. This is not preparation. This is dependence with a longer fuse. Real survival is not about storing what someone else produced. It is about knowing what produces itself, what regenerates, what asks nothing of you except awareness. The fruit we are talking about does not need you to plant it every spring, does not need fertilizer, does not need irrigation. It grows in places where industrial agriculture would fail in a single season. And it has been doing this since before we had a word for agriculture. The people who survived without systems did not survive on luck. They survived on knowledge. And that knowledge was never about one harvest. It was about permanence, about plants that outlive the people who planted them, about food systems that do not collapse when transportation does. This is not romantic. This is mechanical. And the mechanism still works. But most people don't even know it exists. Before there were roads through the interior of this continent, there were trees. And beneath those trees, there was food. The fruit we are describing is the pawpaw, Asimina triloba, the largest edible fruit native to North America. It grows from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, from the Atlantic Piedmont to the eastern edge of the Great Plains. For thousands of years, it was a staple, not a delicacy, not a seasonal luxury, a staple. Indigenous communities harvested it every fall. They tracked the groves, knew which river valleys held the densest clusters, knew which microclimates ripened first. The seeds traveled with them, spread along trade routes, planted intentionally near camps and villages. Pawpaw groves are not random. They are archives, marks of human presence that outlasted the people who planted them. When European settlers arrived, they found pawpaw trees already established in places that should have been wild. They were not wild. They were cultivated, just not in a way that looked like cultivation to people who thought agriculture meant cleared land and straight rows. Lewis and Clark survived on pawpaws during their expedition. Thomas Jefferson cultivated them at Monticello. George Washington ate them chilled as dessert. This was not exotic food. This was common food, accessible food, free food. It grew in places people already lived. It required no infrastructure, no market, no middleman. You found the tree. You waited for the fruit to fall. You ate. This is survival knowledge, not survival trivia. Knowledge that functions without wealth, without transportation, without permission. And it worked because the tree itself is designed to endure. Pawpaws grow in the understory. They tolerate shade. They thrive in floodplains where soil is rich and water is inconsistent. They resist most pests. Deer avoid them. Insects largely ignore them. The fruit itself is soft, custard-like, tropical in flavor, a mix of mango, banana, and melon. But it does not behave like a tropical fruit. It grows where snow falls, where rivers freeze, where summer droughts crack the clay. It adapted to survival long before humans arrived, and humans adapted to it. For centuries, that relationship held. Then, the system changed. During the Great Depression, pawpaws reappeared. Not in markets, in memory. Families who had been told to buy food from stores suddenly had no money for stores, and they remembered what their grandparents knew. In rural Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, and West Virginia, people returned to the river valleys. They walked the edges of creeks, found the groves their ancestors had planted or marked, and they harvested. Not because it was trendy, because it was there. A pawpaw contains roughly 80 calories per 100 grams, more than an apple, more than an orange. It contains protein, unusual for a fruit. It contains all 9 essential amino acids. It is rich in magnesium, potassium, iron, and vitamin C. This is not supplementary nutrition. This is foundational. For families with no income and no access, pawpaws were the difference between hunger and function. Children ate them fresh, adults mashed them into bread. Some families dried the pulp, others fermented it. The fruit does not last. But the calories are real while it does. And when you are feeding a family through economic collapse, real calories are the only kind that matter. This was not isolated to one region. After hurricanes in the south, pawpaws were gathered by communities cut off from supply lines. After floods in the Midwest, families with ruined basements and no refrigeration turned to the trees that survived the water. Pawpaws grow in floodplains for a reason. They are built for disruption. Their roots hold soil during floods. Their canopy shades the ground, preventing erosion. And their fruit arrives in late summer and early fall, exactly when other food sources begin to contract. This is not coincidence. This is ecology. And ecology does not care about your logistics network. It cares about cycles. The tree fruits, the fruit falls, the seeds disperse, the system renews. No fuel required, no refrigeration, no packaging, just time. And time is the only resource that does not run out if you let the system continue. In World War II, some communities in Appalachia returned to pawpaw harvesting when rations tightened. In the 1970s oil crisis, a handful of homesteaders in Missouri and Arkansas replanted groves their great-grandparents had once tended. Every time the system wobbled, the pawpaw returned to the conversation. Not because people loved it, because it worked. And when survival is the variable, what works is what matters. The pawpaw did not disappear. It was displaced. By design. Not through conspiracy. Through incentive. The American food system was not built to nourish. It was built to scale. And scaling requires control. Control over harvest timing. Control over shelf life. Control over transportation. Control over appearance. The pawpaw fails every test. It ripens unevenly. It bruises if you look at it wrong. It must be eaten within 2 to 3 days of harvest. It cannot be picked early and ripened in a warehouse. It does not tolerate mechanical harvesting, and it grows best in the wild, where ownership is unclear and profit margins are impossible. In the early 20th century, the US agricultural system began to prioritize crops that could be industrialized. Apples were grafted into uniform varieties. Corn was hybridized for yield. Wheat was mechanized. Tomatoes were bred for durability, not flavor. The question was never, what feeds people best? The question was, what ships best? Pawpaws do not ship, so they were not planted. They were not researched. They were not subsidized. They were not included in agricultural extension programs. And within 2 generations, they disappeared from common knowledge, not from the land, from the mind. This is not malice. This is economics. You cannot patent a pawpaw tree. You cannot monopolize its seeds. You cannot create dependence on a fruit that grows wild and spreads itself. And if you cannot create dependence, there is no incentive to distribute knowledge about it. The grocery store model depends on scarcity, not ecological scarcity, controlled scarcity, the kind that ensures you must return, must purchase, must participate. A fruit that grows without you is a fruit that does not generate revenue, so it was removed from the system, not violently, quietly, by simply never being included. By the 1960s, pawpaws were considered a curiosity. By the 1980s, they were thought extinct by many Americans under 30. They were not extinct. They were everywhere, just unrecognized. Because recognition requires education, and education requires incentive. And the incentive was gone. In the last 20 years, researchers have returned to the pawpaw, not because it became profitable, because the system is now fragile enough that alternatives matter. Nutritional analysis confirms what indigenous communities knew by practice. Pawpaws are nutrient dense beyond most commercial fruit. Per 100 grams, pawpaw contains 80 calories, 1.2 grams of protein, rare in fruit, 18.8 grams of carbohydrates, 2.6 grams of fiber, high levels of vitamin C, magnesium, iron, copper, and manganese, all 9 essential amino acids. Comparatively, an apple contains 52 calories, 0.3 grams of protein, 14 grams of carbohydrates, minimal amino acid diversity. The pawpaw is not marginally better. It is structurally superior. Research from Kentucky State University, one of the only institutions studying pawpaws, has shown that the fruit contains bioactive compounds with potential anti-cancer properties. Acetogenins in pawpaw seeds and bark have demonstrated selective toxicity to certain tumor cells in lab studies. This does not mean pawpaws cure cancer. It means the biology of this plant is more complex than we assumed. And we stopped studying it a century ago. Beyond nutrition, pawpaws demonstrate ecological resilience that modern crops cannot match. They grow in USDA hardiness zones, 5 through 9. They tolerate temperature swings from minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. They need no pesticides. They need no synthetic fertilizer. They thrive in marginal soil, and they regenerate. A single pawpaw tree can live for 50 years or more. It produces fruit annually once mature. It spreads through root suckers, creating groves that expand without replanting. This is a food system that builds itself. Modern agriculture does the opposite. It extracts. It depletes. It requires constant input of water, chemicals, fuel, and labor. The pawpaw requires sun, rain, and time. That is it. This is not philosophy. This is comparative biology. And the comparison is not close. In an era of topsoil loss, aquifer depletion, fertilizer dependency, and fossil fuel agriculture, the pawpaw represents a model that existed before those problems were created. It does not solve those problems. It bypasses them. because it never needed the system that caused them. We are entering a period where endurance matters more than efficiency, where redundancy matters more than optimization, where systems that regenerate will outlast systems that extract. The pawpaw is not a solution. It is a signal, a reminder that survival is not about controlling more. It is about needing less, not needing transportation, not needing refrigeration, not needing permission or payment or packaging, just needing to know. And knowing is free. It costs nothing to learn what grows where you live. It costs nothing to walk a creek bed in late summer and see if the trees are there. It costs nothing to remember what your great grandmother knew. But it costs everything to forget. Because forgetting is not neutral. Forgetting is a choice made on your behalf by systems that benefit when you do not know how to feed yourself. Climate change will not make food systems more stable. It will make them more fragile. Energy decline will not make transportation cheaper. It will make distance dangerous. Economic contraction will not make groceries more accessible. It will make independence essential. And independence begins with biology, not ideology, not politics, biology. The pawpaw tree does not care what you believe. It cares about water, sun, and soil. And if those three exist, it will fruit every year, for decades, without you. This is not about returning to the past. This is about remembering what the past knew that the future will need. That food is not a product, it is a relationship. Between land and knowledge, between season and memory, between what grows and what endures. The largest native fruit in America still grows in Ohio, in Missouri, in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, along riverbanks where no one is looking, in state parks where no one is harvesting, in forgotten groves planted by people whose names we do not know. It is waiting, not for you to discover it, for you to remember it. If remembering what was forgotten matters to you, subscribe to Roots of Survival. Every share helps keep this knowledge alive. We did not lose this knowledge, we forgot it. And forgetting is not final.